British food is awful. We conquered the world for spices and don't use any of them, and we still eat like Germans are flying overhead. These are all jokes us Brits are used to seeing in the comments section across the entire internet. But is there any truth in it? Welcome into this deep dive into the misunderstood world of British cuisine, where the puddings are black and the beans are baked and served for breakfast again. I'm going to be going through the history of British food, stopping now and then to address and maybe even taste some notable dishes, and if needed, defend them like they're a football team I don't play for. So as we're about to slice through the stereotypes and serve up the truth, it's clear to everyone right now that British cuisine's reputation is in the bin. But let's see if we can change that by learning a little more about the good grub of the Great British Isles. Right. Let's set the stage here. Before the Romans crashed the party in 43 AD, British dining was quite a simple affair. If you could grow it, hunt it or forage it, it was dinner. We're talking cereals, grains and the kind of meat and fish that didn't just walk onto your plate but demanded a good chase in the woods with the hope that you wouldn't get mauled to death in the process. The locals thrived on a catch or grow your own menu featuring things like nettle soup, berries and maybe even squirrel, and whatever fish could be wrangled from the rivers without getting yourself drowned. Vegetables like onions and cabbages were the unsung heroes, turning a bland stew into something kind of edible, while wild herbs like thyme and mint were the ancient Brits' answer to flavour. Barley was already being fermented into ale because water would get you killed, and on special occasions even mead made an appearance, which means ancient Brits took one look at bees and thought, I want to eat that thing's spit. It's a pretty dreary affair so far in ancient Britain, but as with most food on this little island, it's made better by foreigners. When the Romans arrived, they didn't just bring legions, they brought legumes. Grapes, cherries, and fancy herbs start popping up faster than you can say Hail Caesar. The Romans were kind of the original food influencers, if you will, introducing ancient Brits to the exotic world of things like black pudding. Black pudding is a combination of suet, fat, grain or cereal, onion, seasoning and cow or pig's blood, all stuffed into a natural casing, usually one of the aforementioned animals' intestines. Here we run into one of the earliest examples of gross British food. Black pudding, which was first recorded in the 5th century, is one of many things that us Brits still eat today that other countries may consider gross. It's a blood sausage essentially. Ancient Britons had to use every part of the animal, and the blood is as good as any. Personally, I like it. It's incredibly rich, and while I'm not making it a regular feature of my breakfasts, you can bet that if I'm having a full English breakfast, it's making an appearance. And with that, we welcome the next guests to the British Isles, the Vikings. Not to be outdone, the Vikings later sailed in with their very own culinary tactics. Big, burly men with even bigger appetites, teaching the Brits the fine art of not just bathing, but catching fish and smoking and drying it to perfection. Thanks to them, this smoked fish remains a cherished dish in many British households. And while our produce is usually pretty bad, the one thing I think British food stands up well is dairy. We have fantastic cheese, milk and butter. British cows, sheep and goats practically entered food folklore, becoming the unsung heroes of the British breakfast table. And if you haven't had the pleasure to try our cheese, butter or milk from Britain's grass-fed pastures, it's bloody gorgeous. And while you might not have heard of it, it is the envy of many parts of the world. Each wave of invasions left its mark on the UK, like gravy stains on a white t-shirt. From Roman vineyards to Viking smokehouses, Britain's menu started to evolve, from survival snacks to a buffet of bizarre but beloved dishes. And things just keep getting better, because up next are the Normans. The Normans kicked things off in 1066, not just conquering lands, but appetites, annoyingly introducing French zest into English diets. I'm not usually one to give the French any compliments, but the noble tables saw meats dressed up in fruity sauces and spices, and overall, it was a good thing. They also helped popularise pork pies, a dish dating back to the 14th century, which became a staple due to its ability to preserve meat for longer periods, which was essential for those long Norman hunting trips. Then came the monks, who were not just praying, but playing with food flavours. They turned simple gardens into herb havens and started brewing beer commercially, because even holy men need a pint now and then. The peasants, on the other hand, weren't quite dining in such divine decadence yet. Their fare was still more about survival, really, stewing whatever they could get into a pottage pot and pairing it with the ever-reliable barley bread, usually still washed down with ale, because, well, water was still a bit of a gamble. Jump forward a few hundred years and we welcome in the Tudors with their New World novelties. Potatoes, tomatoes and even turkeys begin to strut around English soil. Potatoes in particular quickly became a dietary staple, fundamentally altering British cuisine. Sugar and spices start flowing more freely, especially at the tables of the sweet-toothed wealthy, making pastries and desserts more elaborate than Henry VIII's body count. The Tudor era also saw the rise of a ploughman's lunch. It wasn't called that yet, but it's a simple, rustic meal that combined bread, cheese and pickles and sometimes some cold meats. Essentially, a working man's picnic. While it did become more formally recognised and marketed later, its roots trace back to this era. Spices such as pepper, cinnamon and cloves began to permeate British cuisine through colonial trade routes, significantly altering the flavour profiles of most British food. Treacle tart, which was first mentioned in the 19th century, its origins to this influx of sugar, becoming a quintessential British dessert. Welsh rarebit also emerged during this time. It's essentially a posh cheese on toast that became a popular snack. Its origins trace back to the 18th century, where it was a comforting and quick meal for the working class. By the time we get to Queen Victoria, railways were revolutionising food transport, making it possible to enjoy Scottish salmon or Cornish cream at the same speed as a bad internet meme spreading. Game meats like venison and pheasant become symbols of social status and were featured prominently in feasts and banquets. And with the rise of the middle class, there was a new demand for richer, more varied diets. This included the introduction of French cuisine techniques and foods such as jelly and custard, which still remain a classic flavour combo to this day. Beef Wellington also becomes popular during this time, named after the Duke of Wellington following his victory at Waterloo in 1815. This luxurious dish is a prime example of how British cuisine began to incorporate elements of French cooking, reflecting the opulence of the time. Yorkshire pudding also made its debut in this period. Originally served as a first course to fill up diners before the main meat dish, it's made from a simple batter of eggs, flour and milk. It became a beloved part of the British Sunday roast, a meal that remains at the heart of British family life to this day. The Victorian era also popularised fish and chips. Originally brought in by Jewish immigrants, it becomes a working class staple, and by the mid-19th century, the combination of fried fish and potatoes was both cheap and filling, making it an instant hit. This dish remains a symbol of British food. Shepherd's pie, with its origins in the late 18th century, became a comfort dish and was also pretty handy for using up whatever leftover roast meat you had. It's essentially a minced meat pie topped with mashed potatoes and baked to a golden perfection, a dish that represents the resourcefulness of British cooking during times of scarcity. And we also get the Scotch egg during the Georgian era around 1738. It's invented as a portable snack for travellers. This hearty snack became a popular item and its influence continues to the present day. Eton Mess is also a dessert born in the 19th century at Eton College, which combines strawberry, meringue and whipped cream into a delightfully messy treat that became synonymous with British summer. Now we get to something quite big. Tea. Tea is Britain's liquid pride. When the government slashed tea taxes, it was like a national tea party. From duchesses to dock workers, everyone was sipping the steep delight, because there is nothing like a hot cup of colonial conquest to brighten your afternoon. Tea is still an iconic thing in British culture. Not everyone drinks it nowadays, but everyone's got a plug-in kettle, which the National Electric Grid has to compensate for at specific times in the day due to everyone switching it on and making a nice cuppa. Shortly after, canned food bursts onto the scene, changing the British plate forever. Quality, optional. Convenience, though, mandatory, suddenly dinner was just a can opener away, and with this came one of the most insulted dishes in British culture: baked beans. Now, I've already covered this in a cheeky little short, but one of the most hated and bizarre British breakfast staples has a very interesting origin story. There is a potential twisted story that might fill you with shame or anger, because the ever so British baked bean was reportedly invented by an American and just marketed to us Brits. It's believed baked beans were first canned around the 1860s, but it was the Pennsylvania-based H.G. Heinz Company, founded by Henry Heinz, that started mass production of tin baked beans in 1895. The company started producing the cans in Pittsburgh, but became a British favourite. As we get closer to modern day, British cuisine evolved from a melee of medieval meats to a structured symphony of starters, mains and desserts, each era layering its own unique flavours into the hearty, sprawling banquet that is British food history. The phrase "Brits still eat like Germans are flying overhead" was mentioned earlier, and a lot of what happened to British eating habits during this period is where I think most people are stuck in their ways. World War I brought rationing, with sugar, meat and butter becoming more precious than a sunny day in London. Victory gardens popped up, and people were encouraged to plant and grow their own food, which worked at the time because, unlike today, more people had gardens. The years between the World Wars provided a brief respite, allowing British cuisine to recover slightly. However, the economic difficulties of the 20s and the 30s meant that many of the lessons in frugality and self-sufficiency from World War I were still retained. And while Hitler was popping stimulants and invading Europe, World War II took culinary austerity to new heights, or lows, depending on your taste buds. During World War II, rationing became even more severe. Walton pie, a vegetable pie with literally whatever is available at the time, became a staple, and the refrigerated ships previously used to transport imported goods were now being used for the war effort, so British people got used to making whatever they could with whatever they could get their hands on. Mock banana, which is a dessert made of boiled and mashed parsnips mixed with sugar and a bit of banana essence, was one such inventive creation. The jellied eel, however, rose to infamy during this time. While the British, especially Londoners, had been eating eel for centuries at this point, it became particularly associated with wartime austerity. Now, to an outsider, jellied eels isn't something most Brits eat to this day. In fact, a lot of us have never had it, myself included. I won't be trying it because I know it's going to be gross. And to this day, it's only really eaten in a small part of East London. As we move past the wars, welcome to the kitchens of post-war Britain, where the menu was as grey as the sky. A time where belts were tightened more than a boomer's tipping purse, British food faced a flavour famine that would make even Oliver Twist reconsider asking for more. Wartime rationing lingered like that one party guest who just won't leave, stretching into the 1950s and turning every meal into a masterclass in culinary creativity, where the secret ingredient was usually depression. But then, like a plot twist in a kitchen soap opera, the 60s rolled around, bringing the thrilling advent of convenience. Fish fingers, first marketed in the UK by Birdseye in 1955, became a British classic. These culinary liberators weren't just easy on the clock, they were symbols of modernity. Why spend hours cooking a meal when you could make it magically materialise from the mystical realms of the freezer aisle? The 1950s also saw the rise of Toad in the Hole, which, despite its odd name, became a beloved comfort food for post-war families. Sausages baked in a Yorkshire pudding batter with a bit of gravy, what's not to love? Another post-war favourite that emerged during this time was Bubble and Squeak. This dish, made from leftover vegetables, especially potatoes and cabbage, became a go-to meal for frugal families looking to stretch their food supplies. And now we move on to something that I think improved Britain's food forever. And I'm talking, of course, about immigration. Post-1945, the influx of immigrants from the Caribbean, India and Pakistan introduced new spices and culinary techniques, leading to the integration of dishes such as curry, which has become a British staple. Immigrants that were unable to get hold of ingredients they were used to from their homelands started using alternatives that they could find in British shops and supermarkets. creating an entirely new subgenre of their homeland cuisine. Usually changed and catered to the British palate, hundreds of dishes are invented during this time as part of the British cuisine culture, and these dishes remain unique to this day. Just look at what we call a Chinese. It will differ massively from what's available in other Chinese restaurants across the globe. The popularisation of chicken tikka masala, an adaptation of an Indian dish tailored to British taste, symbolises the fusion of cultures in modern British cuisine. Curry became the new national comfort food, with chicken tikka masala leading the charge as our new national dish, because nothing says British like spicing up an Indian dish until it's almost unrecognisable. Britain now has a plethora of curry houses, and going to one is still a national pastime. Getting drunk on clean Asian lager, ordering way too many poppadoms and naan, and being incredibly rude and annoying to the curry house waiters has been an integral part of the British experience since the 1970s. As we enter modern British cuisine, gone are the dreary days of boiled beef and bland veggies. We've entered the golden era of British cuisine now, where culinary wizards are casting delicious spells left and right. Leading the charge in this delicious revolution are celebrity chefs, who during the late 90s and early 2000s become household names. You've got angry Gordon Ramsay, sad and whiny Jamie Oliver, sexy and illustrious Nigella Lawson, and of course there's Heston Blumenthal, the mad scientist of modern cuisine, who's more likely to use a periodic table than an actual one to dine on. Chef after chef, the culinary cred of the UK slowly starts to get better. And the revolution doesn't stop at fancy dining either. The humble British pub has had a makeover too, thanks to the gastropub movement, marrying pints with posh nosh to transform the pub grub scene. Bangers and mash, which is a simple dish of sausages and mashed potatoes, once a staple of the working class, now graces the menu of high-end gastropubs across the country. British chefs start geeking out with things like sous vide machines, turning traditional stews into gorgeous gastronomic galaxies. Imagine your nan's Sunday roast, but deconstructed into a taco. Somewhere in London, you're going to find it. And that's the sort of thing that brings us into modern day. Certain things in the latter half of the 20th century start to get popular in British households. Sticky toffee pudding, Eton mess, and a lemon drizzle cake all become familiar to the working class and rise to fame as a popular choice for those with a sweet tooth. And there you have it. British cuisine has shed its stiff upper lip to embrace a kaleidoscope of flavours from around the world. From the science lab to the pub, the UK's food scene is not just catching up, it's sometimes leading the charge. We've got a bunch of Michelin-star restaurants here in the UK, proving that when it comes to cuisine, Britain is anything but boring. Sure, the average state of most UK towns and cities is still going to be reduced to curry and kebab houses, Chinese takeaways, and thousands of pretty bad pizza and burger joints, but when considering how far we've come, it's not exactly the worst in the world. So as we wrap up our culinary voyage across the British Isles, we've feasted on not just food, but on stories. A veritable buffet of history, culture, and mouth-watering innovation. From Roman grapes to Victorian gruel, British cuisine has weathered invasions and industrial revolutions, each era sprinkling its own bit of spice on the collective culinary pot. This isn't just food, it's history on a plate. So the next time your stomach rumbles, why not let British flavours answer the call? From the humble Cornish pasty to the splendour of a simple Scotch egg, there is a dish ready to challenge every preconception. Dive into the deep end of British cuisine because, who knows, your new favourite meal might just be hiding in one of our dying high streets.